helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, Canadian certified counselor and award-winning psychotherapist.
Welcome back to the Life Transformation Show. Today we're continuing our exploration of freedom from the 7 family snares. I can't believe we're already in part 3. If you've been with us so far, you know we've covered some pretty deep territory, exploring the ways family dynamics shape us, often more than we realize. But here's the best part. Today we're looking at the final 2 snares. And even better, we'll be exploring practical strategies for breaking free from them. If you've ever thought, I just want to move past these patterns, then stay tuned. This episode is for you. Psalm 91:3 says, "Surely he shall deliver you from the snare of the fowler." Isn't that powerful? It's a reminder that God has plans to see us set free. And today we're giving you the tools to step into that freedom. And who better to walk us through these final 2 snares than my husband, Michael Hart. Michael is a brilliant psychotherapist and the author of The Transformed Life. And he has a knack for turning complex insights into real-life strategies. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, Denise. It's such a pleasure to be here again to continue this series. And yes, it's hard to believe we're already at part 3. One of the reasons for writing The Transformed Life is that I wanted to help people to understand their unhealthy family dynamics, sometimes called family curse in deliverance ministries, but also to give them the practical tools to be able to break free from the patterns that they find themselves in that perpetuate the dysfunction in their lives. So I'm so excited today to be moving on to talking about these final 2 patterns and also to talk about some strategies for breaking these unhealthy patterns.
That's wonderful, Michael. I know these strategies will be life-changing for so many people. So let's start by discussing the 6th family snare, emotional overload. Could you explain how this snare tends to form in childhood and the impact it can have into adulthood?
So emotional overload happens when children are exposed to overwhelming situations, often beyond their emotional ability or capacity to handle. So these experiences may include witnessing domestic violence, being forced into adult roles as caregivers, or even dealing with a parent's mental illness. A child growing up in these circumstances is thrust into emotional turmoil, constantly on the edge and weighed down by responsibilities or fears they should not have to bear at such a young age. For instance, children who witness violence in the home or have to care for a mentally ill parent often carry the emotional scars of those traumatic experiences into their adult life. And so in adult life, they may become hypersensitive to conflict, panicking at raised voices, or even perceive danger and develop patterns of hypervigilance as a form of self-protection. So maybe you have been around someone and you notice that if you just say something to this person, they tend to overreact. Or maybe if you walk up behind them unexpectedly, they startle very easily. These are signs, these could be signs of trauma. And so hypervigilance or hypersensitivity or hyperreactive behavior is often from being placed in situations during childhood where you have experienced emotional overload. So this is where biblical structure provides a powerful context. The Bible speaks of the weight of anxiety and the need for comfort. For example, in Proverbs 12:25, we read, "Anxiety in the heart of man causes depression, but good word makes it glad." This verse highlights that unchecked emotional pain brings a negative psychological outcome. However, scripture also points towards healing through community, through kindness and support that we receive from others. Galatians 6 verse 2 encourages us to carry one another's burden. Someone who has gone through emotional overload needs the support of others to be able to cope. So part of the strategy for recovery is to be able to become part of a vibrant community where there are others to support you and to help you to carry the burdens that you're carrying.
Great points, Michael. I really love that when we work together as a community, this can really ease the burden that we're carrying. So let's get right into the psychological study. What does the psychological study say about emotional overload?
That's such a good question, and I'm happy to share that research in the Journal of Traumatic Stress 2018 found that children exposed to ongoing trauma or severe family discord are far more likely to develop anxiety disorders and PTSD-like symptoms in adulthood. The study also explained how these individuals may experience a prolonged stress response, leading them to overreact to everyday stressors and to interpret minor issues as a crisis. Maybe you know someone like that. There might be a minor issue and everyone else is okay with what is happening, but this person turns this into a crisis. This is what the study finds. And so this echoes what the book of Proverbs warned about when it talks about being weighed down by anxiety and the need for us to have good words. Good words could be looked on as words of encouragement, words of guidance, and most importantly, having a healing relationship with someone who can be a mentor or someone who can help to provide that support to help lift that heavy burden of anxiety that you are carrying because of the weight of emotional overload.
Definitely, Michael. We always need support from others. But what really stands out to me is how children sometimes feel responsible for things they can't control, like their parents' emotions or household conflicts. How does this sense of responsibility play out in their adult lives?
That's such a good question, Denise. And I think this is a very common thing with children because children tend to live in this magical world where they feel that everything revolves around them. And so if something is not going well in the household, children tend to feel that they're somehow the cause, but they also tend to feel that there can be something that they can do to overcome the negativity that is in the household. So it's not uncommon when I counsel children to hear children who speak about their parents' divorce say that maybe if I had been a better child, my parents would still be together. So children who grow up under emotional overload, especially those who are cast into the roles of what we call parentified children, they often feel this profound sense of responsibility that no child should bear. They internalize the beliefs like, I am at fault or I should have done something to fix this. And so this burden of this hyper responsibility becomes deeply ingrained and follows them into adult life and shape how they view themselves and approach life. So what we'll find is that in adult life, they can manifest as pattern of self-blame. Because if you carry this negative self-concept, I should have done something, you can easily see how this translates to you blaming yourself for everything going wrong. So these individuals may feel at fault when something goes wrong at work, even when the situation is beyond their control. They might also feel like they're failed as parents if their own child struggles. Maybe you know someone like that, where they take it very, very personal if their child fails an exam, or if the child turns to bad behavior. They feel as if their whole life is crumbling. This could be because of the weight of emotional overload that they're carrying from their childhood. So research in developmental psychology in 2019 explains how parentified children often develop this tendency to catastrophize normal situations. And what this means, it's just a big word to mean that they make a catastrophe out of simple things. And they're always anticipating that the worst is going to happen. Maybe you are hearing this and you're saying, this sounds like me. Or maybe you're saying, this sounds like someone I know. And so this tendency to expect the worst possible outcome, it's because of the anxiety that they have internalized from their childhood. And so simple things become too much for them to bear, because this is how they felt as children. They felt overwhelmed and unable to cope. And so the simple things in adult life becomes overwhelming.
Those are great points, Michael. And this is why Jesus actually invites us in Matthew 11:28 to find rest in him, saying, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." You know, this call speaks directly to those who have carried undue burdens from their childhood into adult life. But Michael, sometimes the tendency to catastrophize must make it difficult for them to trust in God's grace and provision, especially when life feels out of control. So how does this emotional overload affect their view of God?
That's such a good question, Denise. People who carry this snare of emotional overload often struggle with trusting God and his provision. And this is simply because as children, their early caregivers were not there for them to play those supportive role. So in previous shows where we talk about the God image, the image that people hold in their head, the concept of God that we carry, we said in that show that our God image is shaped in large part by our parents and early caregivers. So the early experiences with overwhelming responsibilities or traumatic events can warp a person's view of God, making God seem more distant or making God even seem punitive. So they may see God as someone who places impossible expectations on them or hold them responsible for the chaos around them. So these people can carry a hyper sense of responsibility for what is going on in their faith group, feeling as if they are responsible for everything that they perceive as not going well. And sometimes this gets them into conflict with others in their faith group because they're venturing into areas that are not really their concern and maybe annoying others because of this feeling that they have to fix everything, because this is what they did as children because of emotional overload. And a lot of this is fueled by the sense that they may feel that God is holding them responsible to fix everything. Psalm 55:22 to the contrary says, "Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. So instead of having this mentality that you have to fix everything and you're responsible for everything because you didn't have parents who you could trust to take care of you, God is not like your parent. God is inviting you to cast your cares on Him. So trusting in God's care can be difficult when you have been conditioned to bear your problem alone. But with guidance and with practice and with having mentors around you, you can get to this place where you can overcome that.
So, Michael, I just love how God does the heavy lifting for us when we allow Him to do that. So, is there a biblical example of a child who may have experienced emotional overload? I think it could help listeners understand how deeply this struggle can affect someone's life from an early age.
Absolutely. Thankfully, there is a biblical example that captures this very well. So a powerful example of a child who likely experienced emotional overload is the young prophet Samuel. So you see, from an early age, Samuel was placed in the temple under the care of Eli, the priest, as his mother Hannah had dedicated him to God. So he grew up in the temple away from his mother, and Samuel was exposed to morally and spiritually troubling family dynamics. You see, Eli's sons who served in the temple were corrupt and abusive. They were engaging in sinful acts and disregarding God's laws. You can find it in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 12 to 17. So even as a child, Samuel was aware of their moral failure around him, which must have been very confusing and distressing, because here he's in the priest's family. And he's expecting to be guided by these older men who are sons of Eli, but instead he's seeing corrupt behavior. So this emotional burden intensifies when God gave Samuel a prophecy of judgment against Eli's family. So just imagine what that must have been like to be in the prophet's house, and as a child, God is giving you a prophecy against the very priest that you are looking up to for moral guidance. But the good thing about this story is that despite all of this, Samuel still came out to be one of the greatest prophet, or if not the greatest prophet in the Bible. So this is an example that just because you suffer emotional overload, it doesn't spell your doom and it doesn't define your destiny. Samuel's spirituality was a big reason for him overcoming this negative dynamic.
So what I'm hearing you say, Michael, is that spirituality can be a powerful coping strategy.
Absolutely.
In Samuel's case, his relationship with God seemed to help him bear a burden that could have been overwhelming otherwise. So emotional overload clearly has far-reaching effects. But as you have said, there is hope for healing. So let's talk about the final snare you discussed in your book, which is rejection. Could you explain how this differs from abandonment?
That's a good question, Denise. So let me explain it this way. So rejection is distinct from abandonment because with abandonment, a parent may physically leave the child. But in rejection, however, the parent is present in the child's life, but their behaviors and their attitudes make the child feel unwanted or not good enough. And so this type of emotional absence, despite the presence of the person being physically there, can leave a deep scar on a person's life.
Michael will be right back. You have been listening to the Life Transformation Show, where award-winning psychotherapist Michael Hart of Elim Counselling Services has been discussing the topic Freedom from the 7 Family Snares, Part 3, which he covered in his book, The Transformed Life. You can find more about us at elimcounselingministry.com or by calling 613-699-1677 or 1-877-204-2914, where you can also make a donation to this Christ-centered ministry. Your donations help us to stay on the air and to provide subsidized counseling to those who can't afford it. Back to Michael.
Rejection can also happen in cases where a child may feel that they are been made to feel by a parent that they are the wrong sex, where they are told, "I wish you were a boy." And this girl will carry this feeling that they are rejected because they are the wrong sex. And rejection may also take place where a child may be suspected of not being the legitimate child of a father. And so this child is treated in a way as if they're despised. Psalm 27:10 captures this pain when it says, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord receive me." Even when parental love is absent or conditional, God's love remains steadfast and unchanging.
Great points, Michael. But what are some of the typical signs of someone trapped in the snare of rejection?
People who struggle with rejection often develop a negative self-image. They carry beliefs like, "I am not good enough," or "I am insignificant," which stem from feeling that they don't measure up or aren't valued as much as others. For instance, if a parent consistently criticizes or favors one sibling over another, the child who is overlooked may internalize this feeling of rejection. Romans 12:3 tells us reminds us of the importance of having a balanced view of ourselves when it says, "Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment." So sober judgment implies that we are not to think too little of ourselves either. But people who have fallen in the snare of rejection often sees themselves as insignificant and not good enough.
Great points, Michael. Yes, I love that scripture because it's kind of helping us to see our worth as God sees them. So could you share a biblical example to illustrate how rejection from a parent might play out in someone's life?
Certainly, Denise. There's one biblical example of parental rejection in the story of Jephthah in the book of Judges. Jephthah was born in Gilead, but his mother was a prostitute, and his father's legitimate sons rejected him because of his background. So in Judges 11 verse 2, we see that when Gilead's legitimate sons grew up, they drove Jephthah away saying, quote, "You are not going to get any inheritance in our family because you are the son of another woman." Unquote. So imagine the emotional impact of being rejected by his family, especially his own father who didn't protect him or advocate for him. So despite the pain of his past, God used Jephthah to deliver Israel. So this is another reminder yet that just because you have suffered emotional overload, it doesn't seal your destiny. You can still be used by God in powerful ways.
So we can see that spirituality can provide a powerful foundation for healing and self-worth, especially when rejection has undermined a person's sense of value.
Absolutely. And so Psalm 27:10 reminds us that though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me.
And just as Jephthah was received by God, despite being rejected by his family, spirituality can remind us that we are loved unconditionally. So let's recap the 7 family snares, which are domination, neglect, abandonment, overindulgence, perfectionism, emotional overload, and rejection. So So, Michael, what can a person do if they are caught in one of these snares?
I think the first step is to know which one you fall into. And this is where I'm encouraging listeners to go to our YouTube channel and listen to the previous 2 podcasts and see which of the patterns you fall into, because that's the key to begin to unlock the cage that you're trapped in so you can find freedom. The Bible tells us that you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The second thing is to know what is the negative self-concept that you carry as a result of being trapped in a family snare. And in the book, we have a number of different negative self-concepts. I don't have the time to go into all of them here, but I'll just quickly say things like, I am in danger, I cannot be trusted, I am incapable, I am unlovable, I am a fraud, and there are over 20 to 30 different things. And the third step I would say is to identify the negative coping mechanisms that you have been using to fill these to find freedom. We call these counterfeit solutions in our book, in the book. And so being able to identify your counterfeit solutions can help you to break free. That can be things like pornography, alcoholism, or other forms of addiction, plus even things like shopping. And so the fourth step is to begin to challenge your negative thinking that keeps you trapped. In the book, we have a number of different tools that can help you to change your pattern of thinking. And also in this podcast, we have emphasized how spirituality is important in helping you to find freedom. And I think it's important to be part of a community to understand what the scripture says. Spirituality can also provide hope at crucial elements for anyone enduring difficult circumstances. Samuel, for example, as we referred to earlier, found hope in the fact that he had a close relationship with God, even though he was in a dysfunctional household. There is so much more that I could go into, but I see that we're quickly out of time.
Yes, Michael, thank you so much for helping us and guiding us through this freedom from the 7 Family Snares Part 3. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today. Tune in next Monday morning at 9:30 when we will be discussing understanding forgiveness. If you missed any part of today's show or you want to revisit it, you can find this and past episodes on Elim Counselling Services YouTube channel. Just search for Elim Counselling and subscribe to stay updated on all the latest content. You can find out more about us at elimcounselingministry.com or by calling 613-699-1677. Please consider making a donation to help our Christ-centered ministry. Your contribution will directly help those seeking support and guidance. Until next time, this is your co-host, Denise Hart.
And Michael Hart, praying together that God would bless you in all your relationships and keep you sound in mind and pure in heart.